A wild week 3 of the 2023 college football season is in the books. Today's Monday, and that means it's time to update the Uncle Lou Top 25. Let's go. Good morning, and that's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and believe it or not, some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comments down below what you think about this video. What did I get wrong in my top 25 ranking? What would you change up if this was your ranking? Feel free to let me know. This ranking is mine. I sort of do a combination of where I think a team should be ranked versus where they deserve to be ranked. So the should part is like, their record, their talent, how they've looked when they've played, that kind of thing. Where they deserve to be ranked would be like, do they have any big wins? If they have losses, who were the losses to? Were they close losses? That kind of thing. I'll do my best to try to explain why I have certain teams ranked where I do as we go through the list. But as usual, I'm going to start at 25, go all the way up to number 1. Before we get to 25, though, here's a list of teams that I considered for my top 25 but didn't quite make the cut. So I think this is 10 teams I have here. What I do is for 20 through 25, I usually list out about 15 or 20 teams that I try to figure out, who's going to occupy the 20 through 25 spot. These are the list of teams that just barely didn't make my top 25. So, like, if you want to compare it to the AP poll, this would be like the others receiving votes or whatever. But I at least considered all of these teams for somewhere in my top 25. Just didn't quite make it this week. This is in no particular order. Syracuse, Tulane, Florida, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Colorado, Maryland, Kansas, Fresno State, and Kentucky. Didn't quite make the top 25 this week. All right, let's start with number 25, Kansas State. A big drop for Kansas State for me. I had Kansas State, I'm pretty sure, ranked higher than either the AP or the coaches. I had Kansas State all the way up at number 12. They lost this past weekend to Mizzou. They're now 2-1, 30-27, a last-second field goal by Missouri, a record-setting field goal in the SEC, a 61-yarder, wins it for Mizzou, giving Kansas State their first loss. They're 2-1. I dropped them from 12 all the way down to 25. They start Big 12 play this weekend. They host Central Florida. Speaking of Missouri, I moved them into my ranking for the first time this season at number 24. They're currently 3-0, as mentioned, just beat a previous undefeated and ranked Kansas State team at home 30-27, and they host Memphis this coming week. I've got Mizzou at 24. At number 23, I've got Iowa. Iowa scored 41 points last week. I don't care who they played. That's mind-boggling for Iowa. If Iowa ever figures out how to play offense and score points, they'd be a pretty dangerous team. Their defense is pretty good year in and year out. Offense obviously has been a big issue for them, but they're now 3-0. They beat Western Michigan 41-10. Huge test this week, though, on the road for Iowa at Penn State. We'll see how they do there, but I've got Iowa at 23. At number 22, the Taters. I moved Clemson up to 22. I had them at 25, moved them up to 22. This is not really because of anything Clemson did necessarily. It's more about what other teams around them didn't do. I had a couple of teams ranked last week that lost that are now out of my top 25, and so by default, a few teams moved up. Clemson is one of those teams. Now, they did, destroy FAU 48-14. It looked pretty good doing it. But I think people are kind of gun-shy about Clemson, and they're going to kind of, hands-off approach kind of to Clemson after what we saw against Duke until they play another legitimate team and show us what they can do. And they're going to have that opportunity this coming week, of course, one of the biggest games of the weekend. Clemson is hosting Florida State. So I've got Clemson at 22 with a chance to move up should they knock off the Seminoles. I've got Clemson at 22. Number 21, Washington State, another team that's looked really good so far early in the year. One of like 8 or 9 Pac-12 teams that seems to be ranked in every single poll and ranking that you look at. I had them at 23 last week, so they move up 2 spots with a 64-21 win over Northern Colorado. They got a tough test this week. They host Oregon State. That's 25 through 21. Staying in the Pac-12 at number 20, I've got UCLA. Up 1 spot from last week. I had them 21 last week. Move them up to 20 today. They beat North Carolina Central 59-7 this past week. But like other teams in the Pac-12 play is starting this week. And look, I'm telling you, I know a lot of you still don't watch the Pac-12. You still think it's like B-level football or whatever. And I'm not even going to try to change your mind on that. If you want to think it's B-level football, fine. It's going to be the most exciting conference to watch this season. Just like last year, every single week now in the Pac-12 is going to be must-see TV. Huge games every single week coming up now in the Pac-12. It starts this week. UCLA on the road at Utah, two unbeaten teams. Already talked about Washington State and Oregon State, which will be a great game. Here we have UCLA at Utah, and there's more to come into Pac-12 as we move further up in the poll. But I've got UCLA at 21. They beat North Carolina Central, blew them out. They play this week on the road at Utah. UCLA at 20. 19, I've got North Carolina, 3 ACC teams in a row here. 19 is North Carolina, up one spot from last week. They're 3-0. They beat Minnesota, a Big Ten team, so a Power 5 win for North Carolina. That's their second Power 5 win of the season, having beaten South Carolina earlier in the year. They're 3-0. They beat Minnesota 31-13. They play on the road at a terrible Pitt team this coming week, so likely to remain undefeated is North Carolina. Speaking of undefeated, Miami at 18, up 4 spots from last week. I had them at 22 after their win over Texas A&M. Probably wasn't high enough, but they came out this week and handled business again. Now, I know it was against an inferior opponent, but they played on a short week. They played during the week. And no letdown, no slip up, no sleepwalking in the first half, nothing. They went out and absolutely dominated something called Bethune-Cookman from start to finish, 48-7. You tell me all you want about how, it's Bethune-Cookman. Okay, look around the country. There were a lot of teams that played not so great competition this past weekend that struggled. Not Miami. I moved them up to 18. They're 3-0. They play on the road at Temple this week. Like North Carolina, they're likely to remain undefeated. 17, I've got Duke up 2 spots from 19. They're 3-0. 38-14 over Northwestern. So, again, a win against a Power 5 opponent. Northwestern, a Big Ten team. They play this week on the road at UConn. So, 19, 18, 17, North Carolina, Miami, Duke, all undefeated. All likely to remain undefeated again next week. At 16, I've got Oregon State up 1 spot from 17. Talked about them a little bit already, but they won 26-9 over San Diego State. Worst game of the season for my buddy the ukulele, but still, Oregon State gets the win comfortably, 26-9. They play on the road this coming week at Washington State. Another one of those great Pac-12 matchups. That's 20-16. Into the top 15 now. I've got Bama at 15. Hard to slot Bama. They have not looked good. I guess they looked okay against Middle Tennessee State, but got completely ran over, really, and thrown all over by Texas. Not really a very competitive game there. And then this past weekend at South Florida, I don't know what I could possibly say that hasn't already been said a million times about that game. The Bama team I saw play this past weekend at South Florida was unrecognizable to me. I did not think I would see a Nick Saban team play that poorly, but they did. They've just got issues all over the field on both sides of the ball. The quarterback situation is a complete mess. Turns out Jalen Milroe was suspended for apparently some comments he might have made either to the team or to the coaches about the Texas game that they didn't like, so they decided to sit him for the South Florida game. And Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson were just absolutely horrible in that game. So likely to go back again, I guess, to Jalen Milroe this coming week when they host Ole Miss. Another big game for Bama. Bama's a small favorite there, but this is going to be an interesting game to keep an eye on. It really seems like right now, more than any time maybe since Saban has been at Bama, that Bama is teetering on the edge right now. If you want to compare it to boxing, like Bama's knees are wobbly right now. And it feels like they're just waiting on someone to come by and deliver the knockout blow. Could it be Ole Miss this weekend? I don't know. We'll find out. But I kept Bama at 15. I put Bama at 15. I dropped them 2 spots from last week where I had them 13. They're 2-1. A win over South Florida, 17-3. South Florida is 2-13 in their last 15 games. They've only won 2 of their last 15 games, and both of those wins were against FCS opponents. South Florida, it's hard to really overestimate how terrible South Florida is, and Bama just looked like a complete mess against them. Not a good performance. They host Ole Miss this week. Speaking of Ole Miss, I've got them at 14, up 4 spots from 18. They beat Georgia Tech at home. Not only did they beat them, they covered a pretty significant spread. They were over a 20-point favorite in that game, and they covered that no problem. They won by 25. Ole Miss improves to 3-0, And like mentioned, they play on the road at Bama. This week, a chance for Lane Kiffin to get a signature win, which he desperately needs, in my opinion. Lane Kiffin's, to me, is kind of the most overrated coach in football. He's got very few big wins. His two biggest wins are probably Tulane a couple of weeks ago and Indiana in an Outback Bowl. He's just lost almost every big game he's ever coached in at Ole Miss. We'll see if he can turn that around this week on the road at a Bama team that, like I said, looks like they're ready to be put out of their misery. At number 13, I've got Utah up 2 spots from last week. They're 3-0. They continue to roll 31-7 over Weber State. They host UCLA this coming week. So, again, with these Pac-12 games, you're just going to have 4 or 5 amazing games every week within the Pac-12 from now through the end of the season. This is one of them. Utah hosting UCLA. I've got Utah at 13. At number 12, I've got LSU. Absolutely destroyed Mississippi State. In a lot of people's most popular upset pick of the week. A lot of people were on Mississippi State last week. Didn't come to fruition. LSU jumped on them early. I think Jaden Daniels at one point had completed 22 out of 23 passes, and his only incompletion was a pass he had thrown out of bounds. LSU looked dominant in a win over Mississippi State on the road in Starkville this past weekend, 41-14. They improved to 2-1. Their only loss coming week 1 to Florida State. They play Arkansas at home this coming week. I've got LSU at 12. Number 11, Oklahoma. I think I'm higher on Oklahoma than probably any other place you'll find. I had them at 14 last week. Another impressive win, this time 66-17 against Tulsa. They improved to 3-0. They play on the road at Cincy this coming week. I don't know what's going on with the Oklahoma fans that seem to want their quarterback benched, but I just don't get it. Oklahoma is playing well offensively, and more importantly to me, they're playing well defensively. Held SMU to 11 points last week. That's impressive. Huge win here over Tulsa, 66-17. One week, 180-something to 10 or whatever it was. I mean, to me, Oklahoma has looked impressive in all 3 weeks. Don't know why anybody would want Dylan Gabriel benched in favor of that true freshman, and I like that true freshman. I think he's going to be really, really good next year. You're on a roll right now with potential to play for a Big 12 title this year, the way things look right now in the Big 12. I don't know why you would want to mess with that. I've got Oklahoma at 11, up 3 spots from last week. They're 3-0. Into the top 10, I've got Oregon at 10 and Washington at 9. I just flip-flopped them from last week. My explanation here, I just feel like so far Washington has looked a little bit better to me than Oregon. That's it. I don't have a problem with anybody that's got Oregon a spot or 2 ahead of Washington or Washington a spot or 2 ahead of Oregon, whatever. That's just my opinion on that. I'm very high on Oregon. I think Oregon is a potential playoff team. I think Washington is a potential playoff team, too. I'm impressed with both of these teams so far. Oregon won again. I've got them at 10. That's down a spot from last week because I flip-flopped them, Oregon and Washington. But they beat Hawaii 55-10. They host Colorado this coming week. So we'll see. Is it all about to come to an end for Colorado? We'll find out. But Oregon hosts Colorado this coming week. They're 3-0. Number 9, I've got Washington. They beat the absolute soul out of Michigan State, 41-17. A lot of people saw this coming. A lot of things going on at Michigan State right now with head coach Mel Tucker and some distraction type stuff. And plus, Michigan State just not a very good team against the pass. And Michael Penix is just absolutely unbelievable. He carved them up. Big win for Washington. Moved them up 1 spot to number 9. They host Cal this coming weekend, so likely to stay undefeated. Southern Cal was off this past weekend, so they stay at 3-0. They play on the road at Arizona State this coming week, a game they should win. And then there's the big game of the week here. I've got Ohio State at 7, Notre Dame at 6. Flip them around if you want to. It doesn't really matter to me. Honestly, it doesn't matter where you have either of these 2 teams ranked right now, in my opinion. Whoever wins this game is going to be in the top 4. Whoever loses this game is going to be closer, 8 to 12 type range, most likely. I think this is going to be an unbelievable game. I'll make a video and a prediction on this game later in the week. But Ohio State or Notre Dame, either one did not get caught looking ahead this past weekend. Both went out and handled business against lower classification teams. So I've got Ohio State at 7. They beat Western Kentucky 63-10. They play on the road at Notre Dame this coming week. Notre Dame, 4-0 now. At home this weekend, beat Central Michigan 41-17. They host Ohio State, a monumental game in the world of college football coming up this Saturday. I've got Ohio State at 7, Notre Dame at 6. One of them is about to move way up. At number 5, Penn State. Dropped them down from 4. Drew Allar had his worst game, no question about it. Now, Brett Bielema's been around a long time. He's coached a lot of games. Defense was really good last year. Not sure it's on that level this year, but this was still the toughest test to date for Drew Allar as a starting quarterback at Penn State. And even though Penn State won the game 30-13, and their defense is unbelievable, by the way, 5 takeaways, I think, in this game. I was a little disappointed in Drew Allar this past weekend. Now, I'm going to give him some slack, give him the benefit of the doubt. It was his first road start against quality competition here in Illinois. At least it's a Big Ten opponent, right? But he's going to have to play better like that in bigger games down the road if Penn State wants to get where they're going. They're 3-0. They have a test coming up this weekend at home versus Iowa. Top 4, I've got Texas at 4. They're 3-0. Their best win, of course, coming against Alabama a couple of weeks ago. They beat Wyoming this past weekend 31-10. That game was tied 10-10 in the fourth quarter. Texas scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter of that game to win by 21, but it was tied in the fourth quarter 10-10. They play on the road at a struggling Baylor this coming week. Number 3, I've got Florida State. They're 3-0. They've got what I think is probably the best win in all of college football so far this season, and that win over LSU. I think LSU is a really good team. I just think Florida State took it to them that day and is that much better. I'm a believer overall in Florida State. That being said, they dodged one this past weekend, and that's probably a better indication, or as good of an indication as anything else we've seen early this season, that there may not be a team in college football this year that's just dominant. A lot of times by the third or fourth week of the season, you can see 1 or 2 teams kind of start to separate themselves from the rest of the pack. I kind of thought maybe Florida State was that team. Lucky to escape with a win on the road against a really, really bad Boston College team. Had it not been for 18 Boston College penalties, Florida State probably loses that game. But they don't. And if they go on to win a national title, nobody will remember or care that they only beat Boston College by 2 in week 3. Maybe they got caught looking ahead. They do have to travel and take on Clemson this coming week, but they improved to 3-0 with a 31-29 win over Boston College. They play on this road. They play on the road this week at Clemson, and I'm just going to tell you straight up: if they beat Clemson, whether it's by 1 point or 100, I'm moving them to number 1 in my ranking next week. Georgia and Michigan are both playing nobodies. There's nothing Georgia and Michigan. Well, let's finish the list, and then I'll come back to Florida State. Michigan, I left at 2. They're 3-0. They beat Bowling Green 31-6. I mean, people have been telling me that beating UT Martin 48-6 is no good. Beating Ball State 45-3 is no good. So I'm assuming they also believe that beating Bowling Green 31-6 is no good. It was 14-10. Or was it 14-10 at halftime of that game? 16-10, something like that. It was a close game at halftime. Anyway, Michigan pulls away in the second half, beats them 31-6. 14-6 is what the score was at halftime. They play Rutgers this coming week, an absolute nobody. Georgia comes from behind. They were trailing at halftime, 14-3. Just couldn't get any offense. Well, it's not that they couldn't get the offense going in the first half. The offense played fine in the first half. They couldn't convert it to points. They went up and down the field on South Carolina, but kicked a field goal, missed another field goal. They were down 14-3 at halftime. Turned it on in the second half. Carolina didn't score the second half. I think Spencer Rattler only had like 20 yards passing or something in the second half. He was unbelievable in the first half, and Georgia's offense finally got it in gear. Scored 21 unanswered points and won that game 24-14 in Athens. And they play UAB this week. So Georgia plays UAB. Michigan plays Rutgers. Those teams can win 100-0. It won't matter to me. If Florida State beats Clemson, they're going to number 1. If Florida State beats Clemson, they're going to have a win over LSU, which I think will be the best win in all of college football, and an at least somewhat impressive win on the road against Clemson. You think whatever you want about Clemson. Maybe you've got them ranked somewhere. Maybe you don't. I've got them at 22. I think the coaches or the AP or something like that, one of them's got them at 25. The other one, they're unranked. So whatever you think about Clemson, beating Clemson would be more impressive than beating UAB or Rutgers. I think we can agree on that. You add to that Florida State's win from back in week 1 against LSU, which is looking better and better every week, by the way, because LSU just continues to roll. I'm gonna put Florida State at number 1 if they go on the road and beat Clemson. And then Notre Dame, the winner of Notre Dame, Ohio State, depending on how Georgia and Michigan do, the winner of Notre Dame, Penn State is probably going to 4. Let's assume Florida State beats Clemson next week. If they do, I'm going to move Florida State to 1. You'd have Georgia and Michigan behind them, right? I may move the winner of Notre Dame and Ohio State to 2. I may move them to 3. I may move them to 4. We'll see, I guess, what Georgia and Michigan look like. But again, It's getting hard to justify keeping some of these teams ranked at the top when they're clearly not performing at the level of some of the other teams behind them. Some people have the philosophy that, like, you shouldn't drop a team unless they lose. I don't have that philosophy generally. In fact, when I was watching the Georgia game this weekend, I said, that's it. I'm dropping Georgia from number one. This does not look like the number one team in the country. And I fully intended on doing that when I sat down to make the top 25 today. The problem is Michigan only beat Bowling Green 31-6, and it was 14-6 at halftime. So struggle. Florida State 31-29 over Boston College. Texas tied with Wyoming 10 apiece in the fourth quarter. Penn State, Drew Allar throws 3 interceptions. So what am I left to think here? Notre Dame and Ohio State played nobodies. So, they played group of 5 teams. So no one really stepped up to take that away from Georgia this week. But Florida State beats Clemson. I don't see how anybody keeps Florida State out of the number one spot if they go on the road and beat Clemson this week, given their body of work they would have at that point. Anyway, there's my top 25. Feel free to let me know down below where you disagree. Have a good morning.